the Soviet Union imposed an economic and energy blockade on reborn Lithuania, a desperate act to stop independence.
Today we proudly declare to have finally achieved full energy independence.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn.
But there is an alternative path. It is not too late to address concerns through negotiations. We will work towards reducing barriers, not raising them. So let's move from confrontation to negotiation.
Good morning. A formal introduction to this morning. Georg, we just saw there, I mean, one of the questions that we'll be asking you today, of course, will be whether the rules-based system can survive a system of coercion, taking into account other global policy shifts.
I think we're all seeing that we're facing dramatic global international policy shifts. And like you're saying, we're going from a rules-based order, something that was relatively rules-based, corporational, to something that is much more brutal, power-based and confrontational. The story of Russia's aggression of Ukraine, another dimension of these drivers of a change of order is US-China strategic rivalry. I think an epoch-defining generational struggle with pretty much everything at stake. It seems from here that US and China are preparing for a world of future conflict. I'm not saying that they want future conflict or that we will get it, but they're preparing for it. That's what you can read in many Chinese policies, that's what you can read in US policies, such as CHIPS Act and Inflation Reduction Act, when they have policies of bringing resources, tech, value chains, industries home. There's the weaponization of global common goods, of resources, of tech, outer space, high seas with shipping now, with the shadow fleet, the weaponization even of climate change, I think we could say. And of course, finally, this is not a bipolar world. This is also a multipolar world, a world in many respects is fragmenting or more fragmented with no single set of values.
So we're going to hear a lot about that today. But just talk us through, before we move on, to the story really behind why we set up today.
Well, the story of this forum, in a sense, goes back to the summer of 2022, where with Fabian, who's sitting here, and the EPC, we were, as think tanks do, thinking ahead, what is it that we need to work more on in terms of analysis and recommendation for EU policies. And we wrote a note then that we shared with some of the partners, that we gave the title EU Statecraft for Europe Economic Security. So it's been a long journey to today, but some of our partners were on the receiving end and are still with us. And so we wanted this meeting, like no other in a sense, dedicated to the emerging doctrine of open economic security. So we live in this world of disruptions, but this is not a matter of giving ground to doomsday scenarios and zero or negative sums. Of course, we're recognizing the scale of international tensions, but we also want to share a positive vision of the future. And that is the story of this forum. We want to have a dedicated space for this. This is the inaugural forum. We will repeat this surely next year to talk about global cooperation and addressing, obviously, the vulnerabilities of the previous era. And that's also the story and the motto of this conference, Turning the Tide, Collaborative Interdependence, and Open Economic Security. Okay, before we get to that, let's delve a little bit further about what the points you were making earlier. And let me invite to the stage Brigid Laffan, President of the European Policy Centre, and Vita Valianate from the Economic Security Policy Department at the Lithuanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You're both very welcome as our first guests today.
Brigid, I might just start to you. I mean, we just, I suppose, to 10 minutes or so, how would you describe the shifts that are taking place right now?
So I think the first thing we need to do is distinguish between the deep structural shifts that are happening in our world and then the behavior of actors. That's a really important distinction. And we are, in Max Weber's terms, in a world of switching, and with deep changes. Those structural changes are technological, economic, demographic, climate. So the world has to address these challenges regardless of who's in power. But then the second element that's important in our world today is that we live in a world of disruption. We live in a world where there are actors in our world today, beginning obviously with Putin's Russia, where the norms of the international system have been breached. But of course then we also have the disruptor in chief, Trump. And when Trump said, when he talked of Liberation Day, what did he mean by Liberation Day? Essentially what he meant was that the United States, under his administration, wants to free itself from rules, to liberate itself from constraints. In other words, that Trump's America can engage in deeply coercive statecraft. So the disruption, and of course that has a chilling effect on business. It introduces uncertainty. Europe, as we speak today, doesn't know what tariff regime it will have in a month's time. It doesn't know if NATO and the nuclear commitment survives over the next number of years. And we don't know today what will happen in Ukraine. That has a chilling effect on decision-making. It has a chilling effect in terms of, I would not like to sit in a boardroom today and try to determine what you should do in terms of 5-year major commitments of investment, 10-year major commitments of investment, because there's such contingency in the world. And of course, it appears as if the constraints are limited on Trump. As far as I can see, the domestic constraints, the rule of law, the courts have some constraint, but not enough. And it looks to me as if market power is our remaining counterbalancer in the world today, which means that public power is under a lot of strain as we speak.
And would you use the term coercion? Is that?
I think we're seeing a world of coercive statecraft. And what's interesting is, historically, one tends to use coercion against one's enemies. But what's striking today is no one is free from coercion. One's allies are, in fact, probably more open to coercion than other. And of course, for Europe cannot afford to be squeezed in the midst of the great power competition that we see. And in the end, the pause with China was because the retailers went to Trump and said there will be the shelves will be empty. So what's Europe's killer variable? What does it have that the United States needs so desperately that there has to be limits on the coercive power? I would also say, though, in terms of Europe, that the literature on small states talks of small states must be smart in a world. Successful small states are all very smart at navigating complex international systems. The EU has got to learn that to be smart, to be strategic, to be adaptable, and to be agile, given the nature of contingencies in the world as we see.
Just before I move on to Vita, do you think that the Trump administration is negotiating in good faith?
I think, I'm not sure I would use the terms good or bad faith. It's simply erratic, because the president himself is extremely erratic. The playbook is he threatens, then he announces, then he pauses, then there's negotiation. But it's never over. And we should remember that Trump has been talking about tariffs since the 1980s. This is not new. This is part of a very old playbook.
Vita, I've just come back from Lithuania, covering one of NATO's biggest military exercises, 26,000 troops. Could you tell us a little bit about what economic security means for you personally, coming from Lithuania?
I would like to come back in time 30 5 years ago. Back then, I was 9 years old girl, standing in a very, very long queue to buy sugar. Sugar not for the sweets, sugar to make sure we have preserved our harvest, a fruit harvest. Why we had a lack of sugar? Because in March 11, Lithuania declared its independence, and 1 month later, Moscow started a blockade, economic blockade on Lithuania, cutting oil, reducing by 84% gas import to Lithuania, stopping import from paper, which we use to print newspapers, blocking Klaipėda port, railway system, and so on and so forth. So that's the lesson we learned hard, but we took actions. So for Lithuania, economic security was embedded into our independence. We started to act on it. We built an oil terminal, we built LNG terminal, we built connections to neighboring countries. In a video we saw our president a few months ago declaring this the end of the energy independent circle with synchronization with continental Europe. So that's the lesson we learned, and perhaps something what we could show other countries how to proceed. But it's not the only one. 2021, we opened Taiwanese mission in Vilnius, and then a few days later, Lithuania simply disappeared from the Chinese custom list as a country. It did not exist. So all import was simply dropped to zero. We calculated that as an option, but that was not the only thing. The thing we perhaps didn't think through is the secondary issue.
Okay.
The goods, the supply chains with Lithuanian components in the final products were also targeted. And then you have a pressure from your peers to do something about it. And the second lesson, you need to have very good friends. You need to make sure that you are in the unions and you have partners which supports you. So the third lesson, may I, and that will be the last one, investments. We started screening investments and transactions already back in 2002. Just now we're negotiating and enforcing regulation on EU level on investment screening, but that's something what we did already for 20 years with understanding how vulnerable you can be if your critical infrastructure, critical companies are ruled by someone else. So perhaps it's not, we can learn from the lesson and we can act, we can learn from them and took a note, and to taking a note is not enough.
Okay, Vita, thank you very much. And of course, the lesson being that it's not just Russia that we have to be concerned about, it's China as well.
Thank you, Vita, and thank you, Brigid. I think that was an excellent way to start off this conversation. Putting a name on coercion, realizing that it runs deep. It has a long history, also in Europe. Putting a name on it in terms of what is happening today, but also as expressed by Brigid and Vita, a need for friendship, a need for solidarity in standing up to that. And that applies, of course, inside Europe, but also more broadly internationally. I would like to bring somebody else into this conversation. We wanted this forum as a forum, not only as a conference. And by that I mean we don't want a succession of speeches only. We want to find the moments on and off stage for people to talk to each other. And just like Vita and Brigid just did it, we also have to be precise in naming things, sometimes brutally honest. But we want also this conversation, in addition to being precise and honest, to only have one constraint in the exchange of views, because views might differ, and that is mutual respect. That's the spirit of the forum. The other aspect of this forum that's important is that it is about partnership. We have constructed this forum with 9 knowledge partners across the world that we are very proud of and pleased that are with us in this process and today. It's the Atlantic Council from Washington, D.C. It's the Australian Strategic Policy Institute from Canberra. It's the Institute of Geoeconomics from Tokyo. It's the Jacques Delors Institute from Paris. It's the Korea Development Institute from Seoul. It's the Polish Economic Institute from Warsaw. It's the Royal Institute Elcano from Madrid and the Royal United Services Institute from London. And last but not least, of course, Think Tank Europa from Copenhagen. So thank you very much to all of you for being here and to participating in this. And of course, we're having a media partnership with Euronews that we're very pleased to have, Shona, so thank you for that.
Welcome.
And also, certainly, last but not least, we have a number of corporate partners that see the importance of these conversations. We have 3 flagship corporate partners. We have the Vodafone Group, we have Equinor, and we have ThyssenKrupp, and there are 3 supporting partners, ASML, Merck, and Statkraft. So thank you very much for that support. And with that, I would like to invite up to the stage for a word on behalf of the partners, Joakim Reiter. Joakim, please come up to the stage. So Joakim is an executive committee member of Vodafone, the chief external officer of Vodafone. You have, of course, a career before that too. Before joining Vodafone, you were the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. So you know quite a few things about these issues. Now, Joakim, over to you to give your impressions about economic security and what it means to big group, but also beyond.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know if you hear me, but
Yep.
first and foremost, I must say EPC has done an amazing job to gather us for this very, very important conversation. I think from a corporate sector perspective, and I think you need to acknowledge that all of us in the corporate sector approach this with quite a lot of humility. This is uncharted territory for a lot of us. Vodafone actually has perhaps a longer history in this than many other companies because as critical national infrastructure, we have been at the critical juncture of where economy meets security for quite some time. Of course, we provide the digital infrastructure that underpins every economy that we operate in. But more importantly, and very few people knew it, and I certainly didn't know it when I joined Vodafone, we run 10 to 20% of the global internet on our subsea cables. We have the largest IoT platform outside China, worldwide. And most importantly now, we're taking on, if I can put it bluntly, we're taking on and building a European alternative for low-orbit satellite constellations. So we do quite a lot in the meeting point of security and economics. At the same time, we are approaching this with trepidation and with steps gradually trying to understand how to navigate through this environment. So let me share 3 learnings from the journey that we're in. And by the way, we have the great pleasure, of course, of working both in a number of EU member states, with the EU institution, as well as with the British government. And that gives us a sense of the different learnings also we see in different countries. But the 3 learnings for Vodafone is, number 1, if you think about economic security, you actually need to think about it as a triangle between economy, security, and technology. Technology is foundational both for your economic progress, which means your future competitiveness, which drives the robustness of your economy. But technology is also increasingly determining your civil and military capabilities. And Vera referred to her background. I grew up in the Swedish environment during the Cold War. And I am very familiar with the concept of total defense doctrine. And if you take a number of sectors increasingly find themselves as integral to the overall defense of the country. Now the problem, if I can put it like that, once you start thinking about technology, and that's my second point, is that technology follows some basic rules. And one of them is you snooze, you lose, which is a Belgian traffic rule. But in other words, if you drive too slowly, if you're not on it, you're going to lose out and you're going to lose out forever. There is a myth of leapfrogging in technology that is simply not true. Yes, it's true you can replace perhaps air defense with drones, but it's not true that you can build 6G if you haven't built 5G. It's not true that you can build 5G if you haven't built 4G. It is very difficult to leapfrog if you don't get the basics right. The second part of technology that is major learning is that scale is everything. If you want to innovate, if you want to industrialize, if you want to adopt it at scale, you need to have the scale to begin with. And that's part of Europe's, and I mean Europe in the broader sense, challenge. We have allowed ourselves to both neither be paced nor to capture the scale that is inherently available to us as citizens of this continent. So when the Commission has launched its ambition to revitalize the single market, you will find that the private sector at large are strongly supporting this, because the current fragmentation European market is a self-imposed handicap that in the world that we live in today, we simply cannot afford any longer. The third point I wanted to make is where we talk a lot about statecraft, we need to redefine statecraft. Statecraft is not the Chinese statecraft. Statecraft in a market economy means that the state deploys all tools to accelerate and nurture and boost private innovation and private investment. This private investment and private innovation doesn't fall from the sky. It's something that needs to be nurtured by permissible rules to make sure that you partner with the private sector, that you provide it as much facility as possible for the private sector to flourish. Again, there is a lot we can do without paying attention to anyone around us that we still need to fix across Europe. And in that comes also the change of roles. When you involve in the private sector, and this is the journey we were in, and I must say, the COVID, the number one learning for a company like Vodafone is that we had to think about our role in society differently. And what we found when we worked with governments during COVID is that they thought about their role in relation to us fundamentally different. We experimented together to try to connect the hospitals as people were dying. We experimented together and how we tried to map the spread of the virus. We need to get back into the mindset that we had during COVID, which was that we relinquished the old style roles between the state and market participants and actually collaborate. This is why I don't use the word public-private partnership, because I came from the UN and it has a particular connotation. I actually talk about redefining the role of the state and of market participants so as to be able to use the combined muscle to defend and protect our citizens in the world that we live in today. So these are our three learnings.
Thank you very much, Joakim Reiter from Vodafone. Really appreciate that, and a brilliant start so far to the conference.